So, hello everyone, and welcome to another conversation of the sixth cycle of conversations of Corporeal Architecture. My name is Maria da Piedade Ferreira, and today I'm very glad and honored to introduce you to Raquel Guerra Aragonés. Raquel Guerra Aragonés is a multidisciplinary architect, researcher, and musician. She researches neurodiversity and giftedness, resilient design for neurominorities, and cross-model experiences in creative processes. She combines biophilic design consultancy and collaborations with universities and IT companies on sustainable construction. She supports activism in architecture for climate change, equality, and inclusivity as a founder of different networks: the ACAN in Spain, Architects Climate Action Network in Spain, the DFARnet, Design for All Research Network, and the STAP Network, Stop Toxic Architecture. Raquel, thank you so much for accepting the invitation. We are very glad because it's the second time that Raquel makes a contribution to this class and to the channel, and we very much look forward to your presentation.
Thanks for the invitation, and I share my screen. Okay, can you see?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see if I can remove this. Okay. So my presentation is related to neurodivergence because I'm a neurodivergent, and the aim of all this discussion could be trying to show you that designing for neurodivergence is designing for everybody. Apart from that, I would like to show you inclusive approaches where we also consider climate resilience, considering the challenges that we have due to climate change. It's important to take into account holistic strategies. So let's start. These are more or less the sections that I have prepared. So the first part I'm going to talk briefly about neurodiversity, like an introduction for those people that maybe are not familiar to this different way of, like, these different neurological systems. Then how cities could be disabling, not people. The built environment is disabling, not people. Then just some definitions about what is regenerative. And I would like to go through a journey through different scales. So we are going to talk about cities briefly, neighborhoods, then buildings, and then materials, because this is like the holistic approach that we need for both inclusivity and also climate resilience. And then which are usually our barriers, tunnel vision, how is our mindset? So let's start with neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is, in fact, human diversity. What are normal thinkers, what are neurodivergent? So let's talk a bit about that. So maybe you have already listened about dyslexia, HED, Tourette syndrome, autism. But in fact, to be neurodivergent is to have a brain that functions in a way that diverges significantly from what is considered by the society like normal. Neurodiversity is the diversity of human minds, and hence for that, this is like the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. So normal thinkers, that could be majority, or neurotypicals as well, each of us are unique just because of our neurological configuration. So which are like the current approaches about neurodiversity? I think that there is a shift also in the neurodivergent community, and also like experts like psychiatrists, psychologists, neuroscientists, where they want to show that neurodiversity is, we don't have like to pathologizing. And this doesn't mean that for people that really feel that it's a disability, or actually it is a way to create inclusive societies, and also to show people what neurodiversity means, or different neurotypes traits mean. Another trend is considering that giftedness is another type of neurodivergence, and actually it is, because it is another kind of brain configuration, let's say. What's the problem? That usually there is lack of self-awareness, lack of self-collective awareness. And it is also still a taboo to talk about giftedness, intelligence, and so on. And this causes a lot of trauma, mainly in adults. That is usually when you are identified as gifted. So for those that are not familiar with the term of giftedness or giftedness people, mainly it is an asynchronous development in which advanced cognitive abilities and heightened intensity combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. Again, what I say norm is what is usually the majority. What's the problem with this asynchrony? That increases with higher intellectual capacity. This asynchrony means that sometimes you feel older than you are. So you're 12 years old and sometimes you feel and react like 30 years old. And this means that sometimes rejection on the part of society because they don't know that these are some of the traits. Another curiosity is that giftedness has like kind of overlap of common traits with what is more usual known as neurodivergence, like autism, ADHD, as you can see in this diagram. So the question is, are really neurodivergence a neuro-minority? Because if there is lack of awareness, lack of diagnosis, or lack of identification, are we a minority? I have been like researching a bit about this, and there are like some researchers on the USA that you can see these percentages. We are not really a minority, and actually many mental disease, could be anxiety, could be PTSD, could be dissociation, are also considered neurodivergent, a neurodivergent form. So when we think that we are going to design for a neurominority, when we said about neuro-inclusive spaces, think that maybe not. A specific case of neurodivergence is severe individuals. This is my case, so my presentation is related to this way of understanding and living neurodivergence. So why I mentioned this, because it is a quite sensitive topic. So for me, how I live giftedness or neurodivergent is not like a disability, because I really believe that is the built environment. But some people really have different traits where their daily life is quite difficult because of more sensory hypersensitivity and so on. So the purpose of this presentation is doing it in the more respectful way I can to like try to build a bridge of understanding and respect between neurotypicals and neurodivergence. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I really believe that cities or buildings are the ones that are disabling. If a person have to be in a wheelchair, the buildings and the cities has to be prepared for that. We don't have to make people feeling disabled. But what is I think that the hardest barrier that we have usually is society, because of that lack of knowledge about this operative system. So this is like an image that really sums up what I mean. No? So when people think that, well, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. No, so this means the same for people. So we don't have to fix anything on our brains. We have to create more empathy and adaptations or accommodations in spaces and so on, that as we will see are good for everybody. So how I would like to transmit you this kind of empathy to the barriers that everyday neurodivergence could feel. I was thinking about human life cycle and the life cycle of buildings. So through our life, our biological phases are different, right? So I sometimes think why the cities are only, or even like transport, only prepared for people that are very, very young or very, very strong or something like that. So think that when you are going to design for neurodivergence, or create inclusive places, is going to be also for you. I mean, there is going to be a moment when you are going to be older, or you are going to be younger, or you could have a kind of disease that could affect your cognitive skills or your physical mobility, or you can feel more sensitivity because of trauma, because of PTSD, because of dissociation, because of burnout. So these moments, although you are neurotypical, are the moments that you could experience how is sometimes the daily life of neurodivergence. So it's important to take into account that our buildings, our spaces, I mean cities and so on, should be flexible. I think that in the last year we have created very like typologies and even interior design that is quite rigid. It's like the idea of the designer at that moment, and we don't think that many people are going maybe to be in this place, or the same people are going to grow and they're going to experience life in different ways. So I think that we have to create more customized spaces and, in fact, resilience to adapt to the different life cycle changes that we go through. And the same with buildings. When we think in buildings, I have been like 2 or 3 years working mainly on construction and climate resilient design, materials, and so on. And if you think about a building, about how is the phases of when you design, and the same the materials, when materials are manufactured, which are the impacts, then you construct it, then it is in use, and then you have to think about disassembly and so on. So a building has 50, 60 years, and the change of our mindset in construction and also design for climate change is similar to what I have said about our life cycle. We have to think about the impacts in case of buildings, negative for the environment. So this is about emissions. So if you are not familiar with life cycle assessments, this is what it means. So for me, it's like kind of parallelism with that. So again, we all deserve restorative spaces and not such unhealthy cities and unhealthy spaces. And I have had like a look at some research, and it's interesting that many people that are from the, from the health expertise, like doctors, psychiatrists, nurses, psychologists, are the ones that are really studying in depth the spaces that we create and how is the impact in people. So, for example, this is a case about how to deal with migraines or chronic pain and depression through interior design. This also applied to neurodivergence. Now I'm going to define in some way these definitions, because in the next the next slides, I would like to talk about how this is interconnected. So the regenerative approach or regenerative systems are solutions that aims to work with or mimic natural ecosystem processes for returning energy from less usable to more usable forms. So this means that we want to minimize the emissions, and we want to create regenerative strategies. So this is also related to equitable systems and how to integrate this into nature. Restorative approach is similar, but has like more emphasis on health and well-being of people, like what I have just talked about, migraines and spaces to heal and so on. Climate resilience approach is more related to mitigation, adaptation to climate change. What is important is that we should connect human health with ecosystems, because if our ecosystem is destroyed, it affects our biological health and mental health. So this is what I would like to transmit to you. Okay, so let's talk just shortly about regenerative cities, and well, that it also applies to neighborhoods, but I wanted to keep it in short. I'm going to show you some images from Rumble guidelines that are really good about this kind of topics. So this is, to sum up, what I was trying to explain about regenerative design. So until now, we were in the phase of degenerating. If you can see like this red and green diagram, and sustainability is like in the center, where we don't have like positive impact. That positive impact, when we talk about regenerative, is more biophilic design, and like how vegetation could absorb CO2 and how we can manage our waste, like waste management and so on, in order not to be in detriment of the environment. So, well, if you want to read more about sustainability and regenerative design, the differences, this guide is really good. Which are the key elements? The key elements of regenerative design is also like prioritizing in health and well-being. So this also means inclusivity, climate resilient, how we can integrate the systems in an efficient way, and again, socially inclusive and taking into account all the community. When we talk about inclusivity, is again what I mentioned about different phases of life. I see sometimes urban planning for in terms of gender for women, or for the female city, or the feminist city, or cities for teenagers, cities for the elderly. We have to think that the cities has to be flexible for all of us. So again, regenerative design, which are the strategies, or like the more concrete specific actions, green infrastructure, so renewable energy integration, water conservation and reuse, and walkable cities. So this way, of course, we reduce the use of emissions, no? So there's a special emphasis on green infrastructure, like biophilic design and so on. Then let's talk about the topic of neurodivergence or neuroinclusivity. So buildings for all. We are going to talk about design principles in general, some recommendations about guidelines, and regulations or standards. So let's talk about the first standard that I have found, that is from the UK from 2022. It is this big number that you can read there. And it's very interesting because it is like, in some way we can see in regulations how important it is to design for the brain in some way, how we process different like sensory stimuli. So this guide really explained these multiple sensory processing differences and all the conditions, and help designers in some way how to create and manage in an intuitive way environments, and accommodate these neurological variations without thinking that it's I'm going to design for autistics, or I'm going it different. It is also, it depends on the building typology. If we are talking maybe about dwellings or housing that is only for as a specific spectrum, it's true that maybe could be more specific. But what also this guide show, I think that applies to everybody. Noise affects everybody in the long term. Maybe for neurodivergence that can be hypersensitive, could affect like in the short term, but it is proved that noise and this kind of visual stimuli could also affect people in the long term. Actually, about noise, a psychiatrist explained to me that noise is not only how affect us, it's not only about anxiety, about our capacity to hear. They are also studying how it affects our lungs. So it is also connected with respiratory systems. So cities that are like have more noise affects people. So let's go on. These are like the main sections that I think are important to check. And it's interesting because they show like guidelines also for the textures, for materials and components and so on. And I'm going to show you like two examples of these chapters that for me were interesting. Is, for example, spatial considerations, interpersonal distances. This is something that for neurodivergence, when we are at work or even in social interactions, it's sometimes difficult to explain, because we could have like sometimes overload of like stimuli or just the opposite. So when we don't find like a shelter, let's say a place where we can have like a time to stop, or trying not to stop, but to process all the stimuli and to calm down, it's difficult when you are with more people, or sometimes these work spaces that are opened and you cannot have your own space separately, could be also like very difficult for neurodivergence. But I think also think about any of you, if you are not neurodivergent, when you're in an open space, sometimes you don't feel, when I mean workspace that is like open and you don't have like separate furniture, sometimes you don't feel like you can focus on, and so on. So it's interesting because also these standards talk about levels of anxiety, levels of stress. So it really explains in a very empathetic way to the designer how people could feel with this kind of sensory overloads and so on. Another example is there is a section that explains very briefly per typology which kind of actions the management of that building could take to make easier the navigation through the space by neurodivergence. For example, this is a sensory map. I have never seen this in a museum, and I think it's quite interesting to know which areas could be difficult to go through. And the last thing I'm going to do it like very fast. These are like tables that relates to the how we can consider what we can consider to create quiet and restorative spaces. All of these guidelines usually shows you like checklist that you should check while you are designing. So it is interesting because they are like very specific, as you can see here. So, and they, for example, they compare hypersensitivity and hypersensitivity. Sensitivity. Again, they even talk about furniture, how is consideration regarding sensory sensitivity, like color, light, thermal comfort. So it's quite interesting to read this guide. Another like more visual guidelines and more generic that are not like standards is the neuroinclusive guideline of Perkins and Will. So I recommend to, if you want to get like more familiar with the general principles about sensory perception and sensory overloads and sensory wellness and so on, these are like good guidelines. In some way, what they want to show to the designer is that sensory wellness has to be balanced with social interactions. When they say here predictability and clarity, it means that how you navigate in the space sometimes is quite difficult. People, even when people have sensory overload, sometimes you get blocked and you don't know exactly where to go, although you have been in that place before. So with very simple actions, you can make these places are accessible for everybody. Then safety and security, and again, what is like more, I mean, crucial for me or more relevant is flexibility and adaptability. Here, like some design strategies about acoustic control, lighting design, biophilic design, and then about operational strategies is like how people there could help you, or which, for example, sensory mapping as we have seen, or sensory kits. Then, as I told you, I'm not expert on autism, but there's a lot of research about design for autistics, and also how is the brain of autistics, and which are sometimes autistic traits. So these are like two guidelines that I also recommend. So this is from the National Development Team Inclusion, and again, they try to explain how is the individual autistic experience. It's quite interesting because it is made through, I mean, it is created, this guideline, through interviews to autistic people. So it is interesting because in some way the designers get the feedback of the, I mean, that sometimes like strict mindset of designers, and this is what you can read. It's interesting to know how an autistic person could feel regarding sound, touch, and so on. Although it's quite complex because, as I told you, each person is different and each autistic profile is different. Well, not same profile, person. So again, the method is the same. You have like a checklist, and what is important is don't like stay only this checklist. It's important that if you really want to design for neurodivergence, you start to interact with them. I mean, in LinkedIn, there are many groups where you can see the barriers that they express and so on. And I think that neurodivergence is quite open to explain their experience. So apart from reading, it's good to like build this empathy through conversations and communication. So again, this is very specific about sites. Yes, you can see their lighting, furniture, and so on. The last scale, because we were building and design. The previous one was neighborhood and cities. Now let's talk about materials. Maybe many of you are interested in, I don't know, neuroarchitecture or neuroaesthetics and so on. And something that I really missed in this discipline is talking about materials, building materials more in depth. So apart from how we perceive the colors, how we perceive the texture, the materials have an impact in our environment. And if it has, again, an impact in our environment, has impacts in climate change, again, it comes to us. So there are like two topics interesting about this: healthy materials and climate resilient materials. The first part is healthy materials, and the great unknown is toxicity. We are not aware about the unhealthy materials that are available in buildings and that are available in the market. So apart from, if you want to be expert on neuroarchitecture or psychology of architecture and so on, I think it's important to know or to really believe that our role as architects or people or experts from the built environment is protecting people. So we have to protect their mental health, their physical, but also their physical health. And there's lack of knowledge about materials. So you can see like many adhesives that has many chemicals that we even don't know. It's the same as food, no? When you go to a supermarket, it's very difficult to understand what you are eating and the impact that is going to have in the long term. Fortunately, we have certifications and labels like Living Building Challenge that have like this kind of red list. Unfortunately, some manufacturers are trying to be transparent and show if they are in the red list or not. So this could help us to make good choices in our designs. About climate resilient buildings and materials, we are talking first about toxicity, the importance of aesthetics and how this influence in our mind, but it's also important again to talk about climate resilience. So are the materials that we are using having a big footprint in terms of water and or in terms of CO2 when they are manufactured? Are they circular? So can we recycle them? Can we design for disassembly? Are they sustainable? So I encourage you to know more about materials and think about how we all can create a kind of real transition into low carbon or positive climate materials. Positive climate materials are, for example, bio-based materials. So timber, wood, living materials, and so on. Something that we usually unknown, architects or interior designers, is the impact. What you read on the right, MCA, is material carbon, embodied carbon, I think. So it is like the CO2 that the material has when it is manufactured. Okay, so as you can see, many of our designs or our aesthetics, I'm thinking about brutalist architecture and Le Corbusier and so on, is concrete. And actually this concrete wasn't efficient, like the new concrete research that is done. So imagine the impact that this has had in our environment. That's why we're in the climate emergency that we are, because we didn't really realize about the impact of our decisions regarding our designs or our materials. You can see interior surfaces, cladding, insulation. This is, for example, just to show you, if you want to know more about materials, what is high carbon, low carbon, or climate negative, there's this kind of research that propose to build in a different way. What could happen if we, instead of cement-based, we use timber-based or bamboo-based? So the results are quite different. So we can get buildings that are climate negative. So take this into consideration, how you choose materials, toxicity, aesthetics for thinking about neuroaesthetics, and also thinking about CO2 and water footprint. For example, in Spain, our climate scenario is desertification. So the water footprint is quite important when a building material is manufactured. Finally, I'm going to talk, I think I have more minutes, right, Maria? 10 minutes, maybe?
Yes, you do. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think this is the last section. So after talking about this mix of things, my focus, or what I really wanted to transmit you, is avoid tunnel vision. You can be an expert on neuroarchitecture. I can be an expert on climate resilience. I can be another one on inclusivity. But we'll have to we'll have to think about a common framework of impacts. So, okay, I'm not an expert on materials, but as interior designer or neuroarchitect, I should know that maybe this material could have this impact. So I contact this colleague that is an expert on climate resilience, and he can tell me, or she can tell me, what to do. And the same for these architects or engineers and so on that only focus on net zero buildings that are extremely ugly. I don't know if you agree sometimes with this, how ugly our cities are. So neuroaesthetic is also important. So we should build resilience thinking. For example, this is what I mean about tunnel vision, carbon tunnel vision. So you can see other problems like ecotoxicity, like overconsumption, inequality, resource scarcity, but we only focus on carbon emissions. For example, only focusing on carbon emissions is only thinking about the emissions of transport, or only thinking about embodied carbon, as I was telling you, like the CO2 that the building materials emits when they are manufactured, but we don't think about design for inclusivity. So these are like the contradictions. This has happened the same for the SDGs. So sometimes you can see like these labels, like, okay, I have the SDG 1 and the SDG 2, but what the company doesn't show you is that there are negative impacts in other SDGs. So this is what I consider SDG tunnel vision. So again, in our mind, let's do an effort to build in a climate resilient, restorative, and regenerative way. This way, we're going to avoid greenwashing, and this also applies again to neuroscience principles in your project. So this is an example again of carbon tunnel vision, and you can compare to how we can have tunnel vision regarding restorative cities. Imagine that you only focus on biophilic design and you don't consider carbon or energy efficiency or inclusivity. So again, you are creating other problems. For example, there are like in the last years, this trend of biophilic design, and this is a green building. This is a low carbon material. You can see like there are very few trees, although it is 1,000 trees, the project. Do you really need this kind of column of concrete that is massive CO2 emissions? But we think that this is sustainable or green. So this is what I mean, being like responsible thinking and like critic about what you read, what you see, and what you design. Building materials. This is what I was talking about, neuroarchitecture and interior design. Neuroarchitects are really connected with interior design. So sometimes we only focus on aesthetics, and again, we have to focus on circularity, toxicity, sustainability, so no more about materials. What is the opposite of tunnel vision? Resilience thinking. We have complex challenges, and we have to work in multidisciplinary teams and try to create a harmony in all these topics that I was mentioning to avoid further like negative impacts. So this is like the basics of resilience thinking. I think that the problem that we have about climate change, about inclusivity, and so on is here, is the mindset. Because I think that then the actions or the strategies could be very easy to implement. It is important to encourage learning, to broaden participation. I think that design, this kind of living laboratories or participatory design is quite important in climate resilient design, for neuroarchitects and so on. We need the feedback of the citizens. We need the feedback of the people that are going to enjoy our buildings. This is a way of applying this kind of complex resilient thinking through different scales. You can see in this kind of diagram how they want to give solutions or actions regarding high temperatures like climate adaptation, and they go through different scales: the city scale, the neighborhood scale, the building scale. What else do we need? When you are in the building scale, interior design, materials, and so on. So this is like the kind of systems or way of thinking that we need. So I'm finishing, and I would like to highlight like the key ideas. I think that the ignorance, rejection, and lack of empathy of society towards neurodivergence could be as disabling as the physical and design barriers in cities and buildings. The outcomes of designing for neurodivergence are positive in improving the health and well-being of the entire society within the built environment. Neurodivergence is a different operative system that solves different problems. It's not better or worse than what is called neurotypical. So I encourage you to foster collective empathy and curiosity to different operative systems. I do believe that the main role of architects and urban planners is again to protect people. It's not only about aesthetics, it's not only about our own creation, it's about protecting people and creating our ecosystem. So climate change is part of our common framework. Our projects impact the physical and mental health of citizens, impact our planet, its resources, and its biodiversity. So hence the well-being and safety of future generations as well. So resilience thinking is key to facing the current multi-scale challenges our world faces. So please avoid tunnel vision, foster transdisciplinary approaches. And finally, building materials are not only a matter of aesthetic, but also of toxicity and climate resilience. Just to tell you, the last scale is yourself. So the best act of activism is start your inner self and to see which are your skills, which are your specific traits. It doesn't matter if you are neurodivergent, neurotypical. It's your own journey, and you have a lot to share to the world. And I would like to say bye with this quotation, that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I don't know if Einstein was the one that said that or not, but this is what I usually see in front of me. It's like we are always trying to do the same and we expect different changes. So please think out of the box. You are welcome. This is what I started to do last year, and I have created like these initiatives about, the first one is about neurodivergence and design for all. In line of this presentation, Architects Climate Action Network Spain is related to climate change, and Stop Toxic Architectural Practices. It's about in which conditions do architects work. This is something that we don't talk and could be another topic of discussion. So finally, time to say goodbye. Thanks for your attention, and acknowledge to Centro y Mucho that are a team that are expertise in giftedness. So thank you very much. I think I have done it in 40 minutes.
Thank you, Raquel. It's totally fine with the time. Thank you very much for this presentation. I was very happy that you could contribute generously to the cycle again, specifically with your sharing your work with neurodivergency, and also sharing your own experience as a gifted individual. And this is also between both of us a point of connectedness, because I am also gifted, and we have also talked about it before. And I am very happy that you could show also all the research data and also the science that already exists, even with these guidelines, building guidelines, and especially interior design guidelines that can already be used by designers to improve the life quality of people with specific needs. And so I wanted to ask you, because I know that you are also involved with practice, did you already do any projects where you implemented some of these design guidelines, or do you have experience working with people who have done it? And also, if so, do you have feedback from the people who use these spaces if they actually feel that these measures work?
I have been in the last 2 years more focused on climate change. So what I have been doing is like more tools for architects, and what I perceive is this tunnel vision. I mean, we don't talk about different things. So the thing is that we have a lot of guidelines, we have a lot of research. This is what I wanted to show you. That the thing is that there is a gap between research and practice. So we don't usually know what to do, but the research is there and the guidelines. So answering to your question, no, I haven't designed for neurodivergence, but in the last year, I have been interacting with autistic people. And it was very interesting, the feedback that they gave relating their houses, their dwellings, and mainly is flexibility. So it's like sometimes we want to create like many guidelines and many research, and it is common sense. I mean, this is what usually they said, that is like sometimes you cannot move even furniture, and you need more space, or you don't have a place to relax. So yeah, that's why I mentioned about flexibility and adaptability. I don't know how to say in English. I think that these are like the key or the common strategies for, I think, all neurodivergence. Then hypersensitivity is different. But I don't know if I have answered your question. Is no, I haven't done like this kind of projects. I'm on passive design now, and I would like to implement in some way this kind of inclusive strategies.
Mm-hmm. And because you also mentioned that you recently have been in contact with neurodivergent people or autistic people, do you know, or did they share with you any of their strategies, like DIY strategies of adapting their home space or trying to adapt their workspace and so on, so that it would work better for them?
They are mainly from the US, and sometimes they said that they have problems with order or like with furniture, and this is something what they said. And in the city, they said that they usually get lost. Mm-hmm. This is a problem that most of them told me, or for example, lights in cities, that they could get blocked, or this kind of things. One of them has like hypersensitivity to light. So he sometimes said how easy it is to like a kind of mechanism where you can regulate light, for example. Or so this is what I mean about adaptation or flexibility, that even with light, or I'm thinking about hospitals. It's not only about neurodivergence, how these kind of spaces affect us, how rigid are these spaces, and just playing with colors and lights, you can have like different behavioral and cognitive reactions from the patients. So again, I think it's mainly what they meant is flexibility, but the thing is that they are not really aware about design. So it's like they don't do anything because they don't know what they can do. They got blocked. I don't know how to say. It's like they don't know how to react in the space, or which with things they can ask you. So that's why I mentioned that it's interesting if, I don't know, someone design a dwelling for an autistic person, or with a very special spectrum, hypersensitive, or so on, like to talk with them. Sometimes the kitchen is for these people that has this hypersensitivity to electromagnetic waves. Kitchens and living rooms could be really a help. So yeah, I think it's a matter of interacting with people.
Yes, and also there's also the issue of sharing not just how the build space is done, but also we share spaces with other people who have very different habits, very different needs, and also with neurotypical people. And for a neurotypical person, it might be totally okay to have the TV and the computer and the phone and the iPad, and maybe there's even something else doing noise and so on. And if you have to, for whatever reason, share space with that person, as a neurodivergent person, you can definitely be in hell in a situation like that if you have sensitivity to noise, or if you get overstimulated and so on. So there's a lot of negotiation that we also have to do as people, but the space can help. I think that the space can help with this negotiation. We should think how we can design the spaces so that two people who share space in such circumstances could create some level of boundaries and so on, that they can both coexist, because there's also people on the spectrum who need to be super stimulated. They crave noise and multiple things and so on. And you can have, even in the same household, two people on the spectrum, one who needs constant stimulation and the other one who gets overstimulated. And then how do you manage? How do you manage that? And I think that the space can be a helpful factor also in mediating these relationships. I also found very interesting that you had in one of your slides a diagram of how to place in museums with indicating where areas where people can, be more challenged sensorially or emotionally and so on. And I have also not encountered this in any museum I have visited. And in fact, the more I visit museums and exhibitions, actually the angrier I get, because they get more and more information in very small rooms. It seems like there's a kind of horror of the void, of the empty space, and it's not just the visual and the things you can see, it's also the information you can read and the things you should do to interact with the phone and the people and so on. And often in the same space, multiple media which are really competing with each other, and then you kind of absorb all that information in the same space. And I have experienced already quite a few times feeling completely overwhelmed and even not being able to see everything because it was just way too much. And I know that there are people also who are neurotypical who also can't handle it. They just find it too much information at the same time, that the attention gets dispersed and so on. And there's really no regulation yet going on for this. Do you have any more knowledge about this topic?
Well, I think about what you mentioned in the beginning about some people that get like overstimulated or not. I think that this could also happen to a person that is neurotypical. I think that neurotypicals are not like, the mood is not always the same. No, they have like different kind of moods and so on. So I don't think like all the people need all the time to be in a like place without the stimuli or vice versa. So I understand the difficulty of that. I think that furniture, interior design could help a lot to create these kind of spaces. I think that people that are neurotypicals, sometimes they need this moment of creativity. So maybe these are like these spaces where you can do other kind of activities and feel like more stimulated. I don't know which was your question. Can you repeat? Because I think I was in the first part. You mean about the museum? About
yes, if you know that if there's any strategies in the design and also management of museums, if there's any work done to implement measures that kind of regulate better or manage better the level of stimulation they're giving to the visitors?
I think is maybe not about this diagram was about or map was the Museum of London, but I have seen like a lot of efforts in Japan, like to navigate through the city that is quite complex. So I haven't seen like about crowded or stimuli or so on, but you have like many maps and many signals about where you are and what you are going to find. So I think that this is also very typical from the Japanese society. I think that in some way they try to build this kind of community resilience through this kind of guidelines and maps, even like the pavements and so on. I was like 20 years ago in Japan and in Europe, like for example for blind people weren't done. So this kind of, for blind people, this kind of pavement that is different. Also for like there are many places designed for the elderly, because there's like many old people in Japan. So I think this kind of societies really thinking about the different biological phases, as I was saying, is in some way also thinking about neurodivergence. Because when you are old, maybe you can feel many of the barriers that some of us could feel during all our lives. So I think that Japan is an example without the label of inclusive strategies or neurodivergent strategies, how they explain the city, how they explain the buildings. They have kind of, I think, sensitivity to people from different I mean, ages or spectrum, although they don't talk about it.
Different characteristics, yes, or they might have done it also to adapt because they became so technologically oriented, and the cities have so much stimulation also outside. There's so much media and so on.
Yeah.
And I think that also in general, maybe in Asian cultures, the culture also encourages people to be more connected to their bodies, and so they probably also felt like, with the increase of technology, that this also had an effect in the body and the way, the sensitivity and so on. And perhaps this kind of, as you were saying, public communication of different aspects and how we feel in different stages of our life, or even depending on fluctuations of health and so on, and taking this in consideration, which is of course very human oriented. So I wanted to ask here in the classroom if there's any questions, because I'm sure that for all of you, this is a very new topic. No? Okay, I think it was a lot of things to think about, but we still have a little time, and I still have some questions. So I find it also very interesting, Raquel, how you mix the topic of these two focuses you have, the topic of neurodivergence also with this topic of climate change. And you specifically mentioned that you try to avoid this kind of tunnel vision of seeing climate change only in this mainstream position now in architecture, that it's all about saving carbon and reusing the carbon and so on. What I want to ask you, because you were showing these proposals of strategies of how to build in the future to avoid, the same mistakes of the past. But I was thinking also at the same time that we already have so many buildings, for example, the Le Corbusier inspired buildings that we have all over the world, in the suburbs and so on, and it's mostly all concrete. Do you know from your research in climate change, do you know of any concrete strategies or practical strategies that can be used to try to adapt and repurpose these buildings? Because we also won't be able to turn them all, to break them up and destroy them, because we would have to deal with recycling all of that material anyway. So what could you say about this topic?
I think that fortunately there are many activists that are trying to stop the demolishment of this kind of building, because they are aware about what you are saying, that demolition means more waste and so on. So it is interesting how you can, how can I say, reconvert or propose another use for a building. I mean, there are in Sweden, I'm thinking about a case, I don't remember the name of, but it is like in industrial area that they have reconverted, and they have it has become regenerative. In Spain, we have, fortunately, our regulations protect a lot the buildings, so we cannot demolish. But for example, in the UK, they have a lot of fight about this. But there's a movement like trying, for example, to reuse offices. I mean, since COVID, people work online, so what are we going to do with all these spaces, no? So this is something that I think, for example, in Spain is also like kind of topic that could be converted into dwellings, or for example, co-housing or co-living. I think that all this movement of co-housing, co-living, it's also quite interesting, because we are more, how can I say, alone in cities, and people are, our population is getting old and old. So this kind of also to reconvert this kind of ugly buildings into co-housing or co-living. There's some cases, I think, in Hamburg, that how they are reconverting parkings in car parkings into like co-housing, social co-housing. So it is interesting. I mean, they study which part of the structure they have to keep, and then they use, for example, timber or so on. I mean, if they want like more floors, or I mean more stories, they use like this kind of structure that is more friendly. So yeah, I think there's a lot of innovation also on bio-based materials, and it's interesting because this is how we can also change the market from high carbon materials like asphalt, concrete or cement into positive, climate positive materials.
Yes, and also economically, it can also be an important strategy because we are dealing now with the whole post-pandemic time, also with issues regarding costs and all of that. So it can also be more effective to transform, as we were saying, these examples transform already existing buildings, and also investment in natural materials. Eventually, it becomes even cheaper than actually using these other materials, which might be expensive and at the same time not even so sustainable at the same time. I'm not
sorry. I'm thinking about the projects of Lacaton and Basal. Lacaton and Basal, they are like French studio of architecture. They are Pritzker of architecture, and they convert like this kind of social housing, ugly social housing, and they retrofit them. So I was thinking, you asked me about an example, and this is a very good example because they are like pioneers. I mean, like from many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, they are like promoting retrofitting instead of demolish of this kind of social housing. So sorry, I interrupt you. So just to give you a name of a studio of architecture.
No problem. I would give you just ask you just one final question, because this is also something that I'm not informed about, and it just came now in sequence with the question I asked you before, which has to do with the cost of sustainable materials. Do you know if sustainable materials, more natural materials that are easy to recycle and so on, do you know if they are still mostly affordable, or are they also becoming the new building luxury, so to say?
Difficult question. Difficult question because the thing is that you have to prove in some way that the materials are like sustainable or the life cycle, and for that they need the EPDs, the environmental product declaration. So sometimes it's very difficult for like startups that are on this kind of new materials, for example, recycling textiles, and you convert it into insulation, or recycling materials from textile materials from hospitals that are waste, and you convert into materials. They told me like the difficulty is mainly this, and the cost is that to be in the market. They have to compete with materials that are like more like in the conservative market. So they have like more labels, more declarations, and so on. And the current regulations ask for this kind of climate declarations. For example, in it's not exactly called climate declaration, but for example, EPD certification and so on. It was approved in March. It is the Paris Agreement. So it is about the emissions of like emissions of carbon emissions per typology and so on. So there's going to be like benchmarks, although it comes a bit late. And for that, it is required a life cycle assessment of the building and also of certain components. So this is the difficulty that new materials could have. And I think that the cost could be also related to all this process. And also maybe some bio-based, I don't know if they need more water. So if you are in a location where the future scenario is the certification, they could have difficulties. But they're like, for example, building boards with a straw, even with marine vegetation, they are doing very interesting things. But I think that they need more incentives from the administration to be there and to get that labels and all this life cycle assessment, because it's important what you said, that you can say that it's bio-based or it has a recycled content, but maybe afterwards, when the building is disassembled, this material with recycled content cannot be recycled again. So you have another problem. So that's why this kind of life cycle assessment are important, and this means money, and they have to renovate. So I think this could be the main challenge for them.
Well, but this also is an important discussion to have with the investors, that the investors have to understand that in the beginning it's important to do more investment basically, and not save so much on costs and do the investment, because in the long run it ends up being the best decision, not just in terms of the investment, but also in terms of the benefits of everybody.
Yeah, I think also architects. I mean, the more we could know about materials, the more diverse is going to be the market. Because if we don't know that a different material exists, there's not going to be a demand on that. So this is how we can, in some way, help to shift the market.
Yes, and maybe we also need more architects directly involved with the development of the materials. It could be also something that would encourage the market to grow, because there would be more offer and then also more competition, and that would also perhaps make more incentives. Yeah. Okay, there would be, of course, many more threads to continue, but we have to stop for now. So thank you so much, Raquel, again for your contribution. This was again a very interesting conversation, and it was. I will definitely look again at your presentation and at the slides, because there was a lot of information there that I think is very useful, and I will also recommend this talk to my students from ergonomics, because sometimes I also bring the topic of neurodiversity and so on. And also explaining, as you said in the beginning, that neurodiversity doesn't necessarily mean disability. And of course, this is a personal assessment that depends on each person. But I think it was very important that you started by mentioning this.
Okay.
So
it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So all good. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.